just in time to see her car pull away from the curb. I didn't chase her. I didn't call out. I simply stood at the window and watched the taillights disappear around the corner, my husband's memory wrapped around her finger like stolen light. What she didn't know was that the woman behind that pawn shop counter owed me her life. And by the time my daughter walked through those doors, everything she thought she knew about her mother was about to shatter. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The afternoon sun cut through my bedroom curtains in sharp golden lines, painting stripes across the hardwood floor. I stood there for a long time after Cassandra's car disappeared, my left hand hanging at my side, naked for the first time in 48 years. The absence felt wrong, like losing a tooth or cutting off hair you'd worn long your entire life. My finger was pale where the gold had been, a ghost outline of the promises I'd kept. I'm 70 years old. My body reminds me of this fact every morning when I rise from bed, joints protesting, back stiff from hours of stillness. But my mind is sharp. Sharp enough to know exactly what I'd seen. Sharp enough to know my daughter had just crossed a line she didn't even realize existed. I walked to my dresser slowly, not because I needed to, but because sudden movements felt wrong in the heaviness of the moment. The photograph sat in its usual spot, silver frame slightly tarnished at the corners. Thomas on our wedding day, young and bright-eyed in his navy suit, his hand clasping mine. Both of us grinning like we just won the lottery. In a way, we had. She took it, Tommy, I whispered, touching the glass with my bare finger. Cassandra took your ring. The house answered with its familiar creaks and sighs, the language of old wood and settled foundations. I'd lived here for 45 years, raised my daughter within these walls, buried my husband from the front parlor downstairs. I made my way downstairs, one hand on the railing. The steps were worn smooth in the center from decades of footsteps. Mine, Thomas's heavy tread when he came home from the factory, Cassandra's running feet when she was small and the world was still a place of wonder rather than a place to take from. The kitchen smelled faintly of the chamomile tea I'd brewed that morning. Through the lace curtains, I could see Mr. Okonkwo across the street trimming his hedges, his movements precise and methodical. We waved to each other most mornings, exchanged pleasantries about weather and grandchildren. Today I didn't wave. Today I stood at my sink with my bare hand pressed against the cool porcelain, trying to understand how the little girl who'd once sat at this very table had become a woman who would steal from her own mother. Flashback, 48 years earlier. The ring had cost Thomas 3 months' salary. I'd told him it was too much, that I would have been just as happy with something simpler. We were 22, both working, both dreaming of a future that seemed tantalizingly close if we could just save enough, work hard enough, want it badly enough. Nothing's too much for you, Margaret, he'd said, sliding it onto my finger in the tiny apartment we could barely afford. This ring stays on until the day you die. Promise me. Promise, I'd whispered, and I'd meant it. The jeweler who'd sold it to us was an elderly woman named Mrs. Kowalski, her shop tucked between a laundromat and a corner grocery on the south side of Riverside. She'd sized my finger with hands gnarled by arthritis, her eyes kind behind thick glasses. You take care of each other, she'd said, wrapping the small velvet box. That's the real treasure. The ring is just a reminder. We did take care of each other. Through Thomas's layoff at the factory and the 6 months of unemployment that followed. Through my miscarriages, 3 of them before Cassandra finally came and stayed. Through his diagnosis, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and the brutal year of treatment that gave us 12 more months together before he slipped away in our bedroom upstairs, my hand in his, the ring pressing between our palms. Don't take it off, he'd whispered near the end, his voice barely audible. Promise me, Maggie. Never, I'd promised. And I hadn't. Not once. Not during the funeral when my hands swelled from grief and heat. Not during the arthritis flare-ups that made my knuckles ache. Not when Cassandra suggested I might be ready to move on and start fresh. The ring stayed on. Because promises matter. Because some things are not negotiable. Until today, when my own daughter decided they were. Back to present. I lowered myself into the armchair by the window, the one with the faded floral upholstery that Thomas had reupholstered twice over the years. Across from me sat his chair, burgundy leather, cracked at the seams, still holding the impression of his weight even after 5 years of emptiness. Sometimes I talk to that chair. Sometimes I imagine I can hear his voice answering back, not in any supernatural sense, but in the way that 43 years of marriage embeds someone's responses so deeply you no longer need them present to know what they'd say. "Don't let her walk over you," the chair would say in Thomas's voice. "You taught her better than this." I had taught her better. Or I thought I had. Taught her about respect and integrity and the difference between things that have monetary value and things that have worth beyond price. But somewhere between childhood and now, those lessons had been discarded like outgrown clothes. My phone sat on the side table, silent. No call from Cassandra. No text with explanation or apology. Just the absence of the ring and the certainty that she'd taken it deliberately, waited until I was asleep, slipped it off my finger like a thief in the night. The pattern emerges. This wasn't the first time, of course. The pattern had been building for years, though I'd chosen to excuse it, rationalize it, tell myself she was going through a hard time. Last summer, she'd borrowed my grandmother's cameo brooch. Said she wanted to wear it to a gallery opening, that it would mean so much to have a piece of family history with her. I'd hesitated, but she'd looked so earnest that I'd said yes. I never saw the brooch again. When I asked about it, she'd gotten defensive. Said she'd returned it, that I must have misplaced it, that maybe my memory wasn't what it used to be. The implication hung in the air, maybe I was getting old, getting confused, imagining things. I wasn't confused. The brooch was gone. Before that, it was the silver tea service my mother had given me, the one that had crossed an ocean from Ireland in a steamer trunk. Cassandra had asked to borrow it for a dinner party. The tea service never came back. When I asked, she said it had been stolen during the party, that she was devastated, that she couldn't believe I was making her feel worse about an already traumatic situation. The watch came next. Thomas's father's pocket watch, gold with an engraved inscription. It had been given to Thomas when his father died, passed to me when Thomas died. Cassandra had asked to show it to an appraiser to see what it might be worth for insurance purposes. It never came back from the appraiser. Each time, I'd convinced myself it was the last time. Each time, I'd told myself she'd learned that being her mother meant giving her chances even when she didn't deserve them. But the ring was different. The ring wasn't a family heirloom passed down through generations. It was the symbol of my marriage, the physical manifestation of a promise made and kept, the last tangible connection to the man I'd loved for 43 years. And she'd taken it while I slept. The neighborhood whispers. The next morning, I walked to Sacred Heart Church for the Thursday morning service. I've gone every week since Thomas died, not because I'm particularly devout, but because the routine grounds me. Mrs. Delgado was arranging flowers near the altar when I arrived. She glanced at me, then at my left hand, and her expression shifted from pleasant greeting to careful concern. "Margaret," she said softly. "Your ring." "It's being cleaned," I lied, the words coming easier than expected. She nodded, but her eyes said she didn't believe me. In a neighborhood where everyone has known everyone else for decades, you can't hide much. Certainly not the sudden absence of a wedding ring worn for 48 years. After the service, Father Rodriguez caught my arm gently. He's a good man, mid-50s, with kind eyes that have seen enough suffering to recognize it in others. "Margaret, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Father." "Your ring." "I'm taking care of it." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "If you need to talk, you know where to find me." At the corner store, Mr. Chin was restocking shelves. He'd run that store for 30 years, knew every customer by name. "Good morning, Mrs. Sullivan," he said, then his eyes dropped to my hand. His smile faltered. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine, David." But the lie was wearing thin, and we both knew it. Walking home, I passed 3 more neighbors. Each noticed. Each asked, in their own way, if I was all right. By the time I reached my front door, I felt like I was wearing a sign, "My daughter stole from me." The shame wasn't for what Cassandra had done. The shame was in everyone knowing, in being the object of pity, in being the elderly woman whose own child had betrayed her trust. Cassandra's return. She showed up 2 days later, unannounced, her key scraping in the lock before the door swung open. No knock, no warning, just the assumption that my home was her home. "Mother." Cassandra stepped inside, pulling off her sunglasses. She was wearing designer labels slightly past their season, expensive-looking pieces that I suspected were bought second-hand. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked successful, put together. I knew better. "Cassandra." I remained seated in my armchair. She glanced around the living room with that expression she always wore when she visited, a mix of nostalgia and judgment. "We need to talk about your situation," she said, settling onto the sofa without invitation. "My situation? Living here alone. At your age." She leaned forward. "It's not safe, Mother. What if you fall? What if something happens? I manage fine. For now." She waved a hand around the room. "But this house is too much for one person. The maintenance, the property taxes. You're sitting on a fortune in real estate, and for what?" My hands gripped the armrests. "This is my home. It's a house, Mother. There's a difference." She pulled out her phone. "I've been looking at some wonderful senior communities. Assisted living facilities with activities and meal plans. I don't want assisted living. I want to live in my home." Her jaw tightened. The mask of concern slipped. "You're being unreasonable. I'm trying to help you plan for your future." "My future? Or yours?" The question hung between us. Her face flushed. "What's that supposed to mean? Where's my ring, Cassandra?" She blinked. "What ring? Don't play games." "My wedding ring. The one you took while I was sleeping." "I didn't take it. I borrowed it." "Without asking?" "I needed some cash quickly, and I knew you'd just say no." "It is a big deal. That ring has been on my finger for 48 years. She stood, pacing, her voice rising. "It's just jewelry, Mother. Just a piece of metal. Dad's been dead for 5 years. Wearing it doesn't bring him back." The words hit like a slap. I rose from my chair slowly, deliberately. I looked at my daughter and saw a stranger wearing a familiar face. "That ring," I said quietly, "represents 43 years of marriage. It represents your father working double shifts so you could have piano lessons. It represents nights I sat by his hospital bed while you were too busy to visit. That's not fair. It represents a promise I made and kept. Something you clearly know nothing about." Her face went red. "I don't have to listen to this." "No," I agreed. "You don't." She grabbed her purse, her movements sharp and angry. "The ring is at Lucia's pawn on 7th Street. I'll buy it back when I have the money. Unless you want to just give me $400 right now." "I'm not giving you anything, Cassandra." "Fine." She stormed toward the door, then turned back. "When you're ready to be realistic about selling this house, call me. Until then, I have better things to do than listen to lectures about sentimentality." The door slammed. The windows rattled. Then silence. I stood alone with my anger and my grief in my bare left hand. On the mantel, the clock ticked on. Thomas's photograph smiled from a lifetime ago. I walked to the window and watched Cassandra's car pull away. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't going to wait quietly. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 20 years. "Lucia's pawn," a woman's voice said. "Lucia," I said. "It's Margaret. Margaret Sullivan. I need to talk to you about something important." There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. "Mrs. Sullivan? Is it really you?" "It's really me." and I need a favor." The conversation was brief. When I hung up, I sat for a long time in the dimming light. The house settled around me with its familiar sounds. I looked at my bare finger again, flexed it slowly. The pale band was already starting to fade. But the memory would remain. That's the thing about promises. They live longer than gold. Tomorrow, I would go to Lucia's pawn. Tomorrow, I would reclaim what was mine. And tomorrow, Cassandra would learn that her mother was not the frail, confused old woman she thought she was dealing with. The morning arrived cold and clear, the kind of October day where the air bites at your cheeks and the sun offers light but no warmth. I dressed carefully, choosing the navy cardigan Thomas had always liked, the one with pearl buttons that I'd kept pristine for 40 years. My hands shook slightly as I fastened them, not from age or cold, but from the weight of what I was about to do. Lucia's pawn sat on 7th Street, wedged between a Vietnamese restaurant and a discount furniture store. The neighborhood had changed over the years, gentrification creeping in block by block, but this stretch remained stubbornly working class, holding on to its character like a fist refusing to open. I stood across the street for a moment, studying the storefront. The sign was weathered but clean, gold letters on a black background, Lucia's pawn and estate jewelry. Security bars covered the windows, but through them I could see the glint of guitars hanging on the wall, the gleam of glass cases filled with watches and rings, and the accumulated desperation of people who needed cash more than they needed memory. A bell chimed when I pushed open the door. The shop smelled of metal polish and old leather, with undertones of dust and time. Display cases ran along both walls, filled with items arranged with surprising care. Not the chaos I'd expected, but order. Respect, even, for objects that had been loved before they were pawned. Behind the counter stood a woman I almost didn't recognize. 20 years had added gray to her hair and lines around her eyes, but the posture was the same, the way she held herself, alert but not defensive, ready but not aggressive. Mrs. Sullivan. Lucia Torres came around the counter, moving quickly despite the weight she'd gained over the years. Her eyes were bright with emotion I couldn't quite read. "I couldn't believe it when you called. After all these years." "Hello, Lucia." We stood there awkwardly for a moment, two women separated by decades and circumstances, connected by a night neither of us had ever forgotten. "You look good," Lucia said finally. "I mean, you look the same." I smiled faintly. "Liar. But thank you." She laughed, a short, nervous sound. "Coffee? I just made a pot. Please." She disappeared into a back room and returned with 2 mugs, both chipped but clean. We sat at a small table near the window where she apparently did paperwork, surrounded by ledgers and a computer that looked 10 years old. "I own the place now," Lucia said, gesturing around. "Bought it from Mr. Hernandez 5 years ago when he retired. Never thought I'd end up here, but..." She shrugged. "Life has a sense of humor." "It does indeed." Silence settled between us, comfortable but heavy with unspoken history. "Your daughter came in 3 days ago," Lucia said finally, her voice careful. I recognized the name on her ID. Sullivan. I thought maybe, but then I saw the ring. "You knew it was mine?" "Mrs. Sullivan, I've never forgotten that ring." "How could I?" She reached across the table and gently took my left hand, looking at the pale band of skin. "When she told me it was her mother's ring, that her mother didn't need it anymore." Her voice hardened. I knew she was lying. My throat tightened. "What did you give her for it?" $400. "That's about half what it's worth, but she was desperate. Kept checking her phone, said she had bills to pay, needed cash immediately." Lucia released my hand. "I put it in the back safe. Told myself if you didn't come for it within a week, I'd find a way to get it back to you myself." "You've done more than enough already, Lucia." "I've done nothing." Her eyes glistened. "Mrs. Sullivan, you saved my life. What I did was it was business. But what you did..." She stood abruptly, disappeared into the back room again, and returned holding a small velvet box. She placed it on the table between us and opened it. My ring gleamed in the morning light streaming through the window, the gold band slightly worn from 48 years of wear, the small diamonds Thomas had insisted on adding for our 10th anniversary catching the sun like captured stars. I picked it up with trembling fingers, feeling the weight of it, the warmth of it, as if it had been waiting for me. I slid it back onto my left hand. It fit perfectly, settling into the groove it had created over nearly 5 decades, coming home. "How much do I owe you?" I asked, my voice rough. "Nothing. Not 1 penny. Lucia. Mrs. Sullivan, please." She leaned forward, her voice fierce. 20 years ago, you gave me something I could never repay. Let me do this." Flashback, 20 years earlier. The night had been unseasonably warm for March, the kind of false spring that makes you believe winter might actually end. I'd been working the late shift at Riverside General Hospital, where I'd been a nurse for 30 years. Thomas was already sick by then, though we didn't know how sick. He thought I was working too hard, that I should cut back my hours, but we needed the insurance, needed the income for the treatments that were coming. I'd been walking to my car in the parking garage when I heard it, a cry, sharp and terrified, cut off mid-sound. Every instinct told me to keep walking, to mind my own business, to get to my car and lock the doors. But 30 years of nursing had trained me to move toward crisis, not away from it. I found her on the 3rd level, backed against a concrete pillar, a man's hand over her mouth, his other hand holding a knife to her throat. She was maybe 22, wearing what looked like a work uniform from one of the restaurants downtown. Her eyes were wide with terror. The man didn't see me at first. I should have run. Should have found security. Should have done anything except what I did. Let her go. My voice was steady, calm, the same voice I used to talk down agitated patients in the ER. He spun, keeping the knife at her throat. "Back off, lady. This isn't your business. I'm making it my business." I took a step closer, my hands visible, my posture unthreatening. "Let her go, and we'll forget this happened." I said back off. His hand tightened on the knife. A thin line of blood appeared on the girl's throat. I don't remember making the decision. I just remember moving, using the self-defense techniques the hospital had taught us in mandatory training, techniques I never thought I'd actually use. I grabbed his wrist, twisted hard, and the knife clattered to the concrete. He shoved the girl aside and came at me, but I was already moving, already using his momentum against him. He went down hard, his head striking the pillar with a sickening crack. Security arrived moments later, summoned by the girl who'd managed to hit an emergency call button. The man was arrested. The girl was treated for minor cuts. And I went home to Thomas, shaking so hard I could barely drive, wondering what I'd almost lost, what we'd almost both lost. The girl's name was Lucia Torres. She was 22, working 3 jobs to support her grandmother and little brother after her parents had been deported. She came to the hospital the next day with flowers and tears, trying to find words for something that didn't have words. "You saved my life," she'd said. "You're safe now. That's what matters. I'll never forget this. Never." And apparently, she hadn't. "I thought about you so many times over the years," Lucia said, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug. "Wondered if you were okay, if your husband beat the cancer, if you were happy. I wanted to reach out, but I didn't know how. And then life happened. I got married, divorced, went back to school, ended up here." She gestured around the shop. "And then your daughter walked through that door. Did she say why she needed the money?" Lucia's expression darkened. "She mentioned something about a business investment opportunity. Said it was time-sensitive, that she'd get the ring back within a month." She paused. "Mrs. Sullivan, I've been in this business long enough to recognize desperation. But your daughter, she wasn't desperate. She was calculating." The words confirmed what I already knew but hadn't wanted to face. Cassandra hadn't taken my ring because she was in crisis. She'd taken it because she wanted something and saw my property, my memories, my promises, as resources to be liquidated. There's something else you should know, Lucia said quietly. She pulled out her phone, scrolled through something, then turned it toward me. This was posted 2 days ago. It was a social media post from Cassandra. A photograph of her at what looked like an expensive restaurant, champagne glass raised, smiling broadly. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to invest in yourself. New business venture launching soon. #entrepreneur life #luxury lifestyle." The date stamp was the same day she'd pawned my ring. I stared at the photo, at my daughter's bright smile, at the expensive meal she was celebrating with money that should have been mine, bought with a symbol that should have been sacred. "I'm sorry," Lucia said softly. "I wasn't sure if you wanted to see it." "No, I needed to." I handed back the phone. "Thank you for showing me." We sat in silence for a moment, the morning sun climbing higher, customers beginning to pass by the window outside. "What will you do?" Lucia asked. "I don't know yet." I looked at the ring on my finger, back where it belonged. "But I know what I won't do. I won't let her think this is acceptable. I won't let her believe that love and respect are things she can pawn when it's convenient." Lucia nodded slowly. "If you need anything, anything at all, you know where to find me." I stood to leave, then paused. "Lucia, you said you put the ring in your safe immediately. You could have sold it. The profit would have been significant." "Mrs. Sullivan, some things aren't for sale. You taught me that 20 years ago." She stood and came around the table, pulled me into a hug that smelled like coffee and metal polish and unexpected kindness. "Some debts can't be repaid, only honored." When I left the shop, the ring solid and warm on my finger, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Not anger, though that was still there. Not sadness, though that remained too. But something else. Something like resolve. The confrontation. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to Cassandra's apartment, the high-rise downtown with the doorman and the marble lobby. I'd been there enough times to be recognized, waved through with a polite nod. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt both too long and too short. When the doors opened, I walked down the carpeted hallway to her door and knocked firmly. It took a moment, then another knock, before I heard movement inside. The door opened to reveal Cassandra in an expensive-looking silk robe, her hair messy, her makeup smudged. Behind her, I could see the apartment, spacious, decorated with furniture that cost more than my car, filled with things she couldn't afford on any legitimate income one knew about. "Mother." Surprise flickered across her face, then something else. Annoyance, maybe. Or calculation. "What are you doing here?" I held up my left hand, the ring catching the hallway light. Her face paled. "Where did you get that?" "From the pawn shop." "From Lucia Torres. The woman whose life I saved 20 years ago." I lowered my hand. "The woman who put my ring in her safe the moment you pawned it because she knew something was wrong." Cassandra's mouth opened, closed. "I was going to get it back." "No, you weren't." I stepped forward, and she stepped back automatically, letting me into the apartment. I closed the door behind me. "You were going to leave it there, maybe tell me someday that you'd had no choice, that you'd been desperate, that you'd been planning to retrieve it but circumstances prevented you." "That's not true." "Cassandra. Stop lying." My voice was quiet but firm. "I saw your social media post. The restaurant. The champagne. The business venture you're celebrating." She wrapped her arms around herself, defensive. "I needed startup capital. I was going to pay you back." "With what?" "With the equity in my house you've been trying to convince me to sell? With the money you think you'll make from your latest scheme?" I walked further into the apartment, looking at the expensive coffee maker, the designer throw pillows, the art on the walls. "How many of these things did you buy with money borrowed from people who trusted you? How many of them came from items you borrowed and never returned? You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." I turned to face her. "Your father and I worked our entire lives. Double shifts, second jobs, sacrifices you never saw and never appreciated. We did it because we loved you, because we wanted you to have opportunities we didn't have. But somewhere along the way, you learned the wrong lesson. You learned that people will always catch you when you fall. That there are no real consequences. That love means unlimited access to whatever you want. Tears started running down her face, but they looked calculated, strategic. Mom, please. Do you know what your father said to me before he died? I asked quietly. He said, don't let her think love is free. I didn't understand then. I thought he meant don't spoil her, don't give her too much. But that's not what he meant. I touched my ring, felt its familiar weight. He meant don't let her think love is something she can take for granted. Don't let her believe that people will always be there, always forgive, always provide, no matter how she treats them. I do love you. Then prove it. I met her eyes steadily. Prove it by respecting my boundaries. Prove it by earning your own way instead of taking mine. Prove it by understanding that some things, like this ring, like my home, like my dignity, are not yours to borrow or sell or use when it's convenient. Cassandra sank onto her expensive sofa, her face in her hands. For a moment, I almost relented. Almost moved to comfort her, to tell her it was okay, that we'd work through this together. But I thought of Thomas, of his final words. Of the ring he'd worked so hard to buy. Of the promises we'd made and kept. I love you, Cassandra, I said. I will always love you. But I will not allow you to continue treating me like a resource to be mined. I walked to the door, then turned back. When you're ready to have an honest conversation about your life and your choices, call me. Until then, I need you to respect that my home, my possessions, and my boundaries are not negotiable. I left her there, crying on her expensive sofa in her expensive apartment, surrounded by things she couldn't truly afford. Resolution. The afternoon had turned golden by the time I drove home, the autumn sun painting everything in shades of amber. I pulled into my driveway, looked at the house that Thomas and I had bought when we were so young and so hopeful, and felt a peace settle over me that I hadn't felt in years. Inside, everything was the same. The worn furniture, the faded photographs, the ticking clock on the mantel. But something had shifted. The air felt lighter, the silence less heavy. I made tea and sat in my armchair by the window. Mr. Okonkwo was still working in his garden, carefully tending his roses as the day faded. Mrs. Chen walked past with her small dog, waved when she saw me in the window. I waved back, my left hand visible, the ring catching the light. My phone buzzed. A text from Father Rodriguez, saw you had your ring back at church Sunday. Everything okay? I typed back, everything's fine. Thank you for asking. Another text, this one from Mrs. Delgado, coffee tomorrow morning? My treat. I'd love that, I responded. The neighborhood, I realized, hadn't been judging me. They'd been worried. They'd been ready to help if I'd needed it. That's what community meant. Not pity, but presence. As twilight settled over Riverside, I pulled out the photo album again, opened it to the wedding pictures. Thomas and I, so young, so certain that love would be enough. And it had been. Not because it was easy, not because there were no challenges, but because we'd chosen, every day, to honor the promises we'd made. I touched my ring, felt its weight, its warmth, its solid presence. I kept my promise, Tommy, I whispered to the empty room. And I'm going to keep teaching her what that means, even if it takes the rest of my life. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. The neighborhood settled into evening. And I sat with my tea and my memories and my ring, feeling, for the first time in a long time, that I'd done exactly what needed to be done. The phone rang. Cassandra's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. Mom? Her voice was small, broken. Can we talk? Yes, I said. We can talk. Because love doesn't mean accepting unacceptable behavior. But it does mean leaving the door open for change, for growth, for the possibility that people can learn, even when it's hard. Thank you, she whispered. Come over Sunday, I said. For dinner. We'll talk then. After we hung up, I sat for a long time watching the darkness gather outside, the ring warm on my finger, Thomas's photograph smiling from the mantel. Some promises are worth keeping, no matter how hard. Some lines are worth drawing, no matter how much it hurts. And some loves are worth fighting for, even when the fight is with the person you love most. The clock ticked on. The house settled. And I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 70 years, the lightness of resolution, and the quiet certainty that I'd honored both the man I'd loved and the woman I'd raised. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. But tonight, I had my ring, my dignity, and my peace. And that was enough.